And Elkanah says, well, it's time of year we need to go to Shiloh. And she says, I'm not going. Now, this is a patriarchal culture, right? You don't say no to your husband. She said no. And then he said something bizarre. He says, oh, okay, only may the Lord keep the word to you. May the Lord confirm his word. Well, the Lord hasn't said anything in the story. But when you realize that this is kind of a stock phrase, it's used maybe 10 or 11 times in the Bible, and it's always in a prophetic situation. And then there's one other indication indicating that Hannah is adumbrating the rise of a set prophetic ministry in Israel. And that is why once the boy is weaned, she brings him back to Eli and makes him an apprentice to Eli, and he's going to learn how to be a priest. And this was an enormous sacrifice on her part, because she had been what it took for her to have this child in the first place. But she does this, but she visits him once a year. And like any mother would, she would bring him something. And when the narrator says this is what she brought him, you need to pay attention, because there was no reason to it. She could have bought cookies, she could have bought his favorite food or anything, but what she brought him was a ma'il. Ma'il is a robe, an alb. And it's a kind of an alb that a prophet wears. And in fact, it's when Samuel died, a long, long time away, this is toward the end of 1 Samuel, Samuel's dead, and Saul, the king, is desperate to hear from God. God won't answer him, so Saul says, he gets this so-called witch of Endor, says, I need you to conjure up Samuel for me. I need to talk to him. And we had this elaborate thing where Saul has to go in disguise, because if he's the king, he has already said that if anyone does this kind of conjuring stuff, this is not to be done. But the woman sees through him, and he says, no, I'm not going to prosecute or anything, but I really need to see Samuel. And it's when Saul sees the Ma'il, he realizes it's Samuel. I mean, his shade comes up, his ghost comes up. But he still has the alb on. And again, in two ways, Hannah indicates that she may not look like it, but she is the instrument for dealing with bringing prophecy into Israel in a more formal way. There have been prophets before. And of course, famously in her prayer, that prayer was the template, so to speak, for later Mary's Magnificat. So Samuel is there with Eli's tutelage, and he grew in the presence of the Lord, and in meantime, Hannah had other children. Now, before we even get to chapter 3, Eli's sons disgrace the priestly office. They do two things. One is they sleep with women in the sanctuary. Completely, I mean, this is holy territory. You can't do that. And then secondly, they take more of the tithe than they're allowed to do. The idea is that when you bring your tithe, you're bringing food. And if you would bring meat, you would boil it in a big cauldron, and of course it would come apart, and then the priest would get a big giant fork, and whatever he took out, that was his tithe. But the priest's son said, no, we want you to bring it raw. So they get a half a beef with their, and so they did two things to disgrace the office. Later on, Eli would try to correct them, but he had no effect. He was not able to do that. And then, of course, we come to 1 Samuel 3. Excuse me. We are told that the lad Samuel was ministering to the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no frequent vision. The word of the Lord was rare. There was no frequent vision. And here, vision means prophetic vision. You know the famous psalm, if there's no vision, the people perish. That's prophetic vision. So it's not that no one doesn't know God or anything like that. It's that the prophetic charisma has not been manifest. So, but he is ministering before Eli. He is learning to be a priest. Now, you need to keep in mind that from our point of view, we know about priests in terms of clergy, and we don't no longer recognize a prophet. Or would you say a prophet is a preacher or whatever? But in the biblical material, the prophets and the priests have very, very different duties. A prophet is someone who brings the word of the Lord. A priest is someone who is in charge of the liturgy, so to say, all of the cultic stuff, the sacrifices, the days, the holidays, and all of that. And in time, there would be enormous tension between these groups, and that's why you find a Jeremiah or an Amos or other prophetic figures that would be very, very critical of the liturgical stuff. You know, the liturgy's not going to save you. And it's a very, very different sense that, because in some sense we think that the liturgy does save us because we're combining a priestly and a prophetic combination, so to speak, in our liturgy. We don't just do liturgy, we preach, we read scripture, and all of that is combining that. But in this part of the biblical story, a priest and a prophet can be on very, very different sides. Okay. So keep in mind that the word of the Lord was rare in those days. Now, on that day, Eli was lying down in his place, and we are told parenthetically that his eyes had grown dim so that he could not see well. Now, that means two things. One is he needed prescription glasses. Number two, he lacked spiritual insight. So they're going to be playing with this idea of light and being able to see, and it will be important in the next story that Eli can't see. And I'll tell you when we get there. But we are told, even though he can't see, that the lamp of God had not yet been extinguished. There is still a flicker of light. Again, the narrator is playing with the idea here of light. And Samuel happened to be, he was lying down in the sanctuary of the Lord, in which there was also the Ark of God. Now, what's interesting about that is that Samuel is in the sanctuary and the Ark of God there, and both of these are indicative of divine presence. Not necessarily the divine word, but the divine presence. So Samuel's in a good place. We're not told where Eli was sleeping, except it was in his place. And these are quarters, of course, and the narrator's playing with the idea here. Samuel's just a little bit closer to God than Eli, and that is counterintuitive. You would think that Eli would be closer to these things that indicate divine presence. Then, the Lord, YHWH, the distinctive name of the Israelite God, called to Samuel, and he, that is Samuel, said, "Hineni, here I am. Here I am." So, okay, good. But it turns out that Samuel did not recognize the source. He ran to Eli, and he said, "Here am I, because you called me." And so Samuel, even though he is in this place where God's presence is, he does not recognize God's voice. He hears it, he responds to it, and then dashes, "I got to go see what the boss wants. I'm here, but you called me." And Eli says, "Huh? What? I didn't call you. Go back to bed." And when God called Samuel, said, "Shmuel, Shmuel." He called him by name. So he calls him a second time. Once again, Samuel runs to Eli, says, "Here I am, for you called me." And it's all of this, as we were reading the story, we think, well, what does the narrator want us to think? Eli's part saying, the old man's kind of losing it here. He's calling me out. He doesn't even remember it. Eli must be thinking, I thought this apprentice was doing pretty well. I'm getting a little worried now. And then for a third time, Samuel hears the voice, once again runs to Eli, and finally Eli says, "Oh, it is the Lord." And again, this underscores Eli's inability to have good insight into God. He already thought that Hannah was drunk instead of praying. He has these two sons that he can't keep in line. And now it takes 3 times for him to say, "Oh, this might be God." And he says, "Go back," and he says, "If you hear that voice, say, your servant will listen." So he does well there. And when Samuel goes back and God calls again, "Speak, for your servant is listening," and the Lord, YHWH, enunciates that Eli and Eli's house, that is him and his 2 sons, are going to be under judgment. Under judgment. And God says, "You know what? What I'm going to do, as soon as somebody hears about it, their ears are going to twitch. Because I am going to bring judgment onto Eli and on Eli's house." Now, in another place, God had promised the priesthood to the family of Eli in perpetuity. But now that's going to go away. And so he tells Samuel all of this terrible stuff. And then Samuel gets up in the morning, and if you notice what he does, he opened the doors of the sanctuary. Just this little tiny detail. All of a sudden, someone who is going to be a prophet is going to provide access to God. Typically, the priest would open the door. Here, Samuel is opening the door. Now, keep in mind that before the third time, there's a frame break in the narrative. That is, if we were watching a movie, you'd have something on the flash it would say Mississippi 1932. And the person who's watching would bring to bear everything that they think they know about what am I going to expect in Mississippi in 1932, that sort of thing. And the frame break is that Samuel did not know the Lord, and the Lord's word had not yet been revealed to him. Now, this creates great consternation. How can Samuel not know the Lord? It means he does not know him as a prophetic figure. He has not yet been called. And you can think of the great calls of Isaiah, here am I, Lord, send me. Jeremiah saying, no, I'm a kid, I can't do this, send somebody else. The prophetic calls are very, very interesting if you compare them. And here Samuel this is his call, and this is the first time because he did not yet know the Lord or the word of the Lord as a prophetic figure. And again, in the contents of the Psalm, Samuel responds appropriately, serious word of judgment. In the morning, Samuel opens the door of the sanctuary. And then, though fearfully reluctant, Samuel eventually tells Eli the contents of the judgment to which Eli submits. When Eli hears this terrible judgment, he says, "It is the Lord." Give Eli credit. This is not not a good message to hear, but he resigns to it. Now, at the conclusion of the story, we are told that everyone in Israel knew that Samuel was now a prophet of the Lord. And in fact, everyone from Dan to Beersheba, that is from the extreme north to the extreme south, knew that. And when Samuel spoke, the Lord did not allow any of his words to fall to the ground. I love that phrase. And that means when the prophet spoke, his word was efficacious. It did what it was supposed to do as a prophet. And then we are told that the Lord's revelation to Samuel at Shiloh was ongoing. Now, here's the really interesting thing. And it goes into the very next story. If you have an English Bible, read the very first verse of chapter 4.
In those days the Philistines mustered for war against Israel, and Israel went out to battle against them. They encamped at Ebenezer, and the Philistines encamped at Aphek.
Can I see your Bible? Yeah, if you look at the big four, look at what's it?
Oh, and the word of Samuel came to
Yes.
all Israel? Okay,
Yes,
sorry.
there you go. And the word of the Lord came to all Israel. So why do the English editors make that the last statement in chapter 3 rather than the first statement of chapter 4, which is what it was? And remember that versification is meaning making. In other words, when you divide this, because in original manuscripts, there's no differences. This all comes later, but it's part of the editorial process, and it has to do to what it means. So why in the world would they do that? Well, it's very easy. Number one, Samuel does not even show up in the next story. And it's a big deal story. It's a story about Israel going into battle against the Philistines. They lose. They don't like to lose, so the next time they go and they bring the ark with them, and they lose again, and the ark is stolen. Now, Joyce will remember this when there was a lecture last year on this very text, and at the question and answer period, I asked, and I've written on this, and actually this lecture is in my honor, and is a very, very fine scholar. But when he did the Ark story, the capture of the Ark, he did not go. Then remember, I asked him, why do you start with 4:1b? Because the chapter starts 4:1a. And here's what's going on here. The word of Samuel came forth to all Israel. That looks just like it's a basic declarative sentence. But this occurs about 12 times in the Bible, in this formula, and every single time it introduces prophetic speech. And it's sort of the sort of thing that when you use certain language and you know your audience well enough, they can finish the sentence for you. If I said to you, ask not, everyone will know that I'm quoting John Kennedy's 1961 inaugural address. For football fans, as you hear the music of Monday Night Football, you know that the game's coming on. Think of that guy in Las Vegas who's made a ton of money by introducing boxing. Let's get ready to rumble. So this language makes you expect something. Okay. So here at the beginning of chapter 4, the word of the Lord, word of Samuel comes to all Israel, and what does Israel do? They pay no attention. They take on the Philistines. There's no prayer. There's no let's check in with a prophet. Let's not check with a priest. And so, again, you would think Israel's the elect people of God. They're supposed to win. And that's the old Philistines, they win. And so the next time they bring the Ark of God in there, and when the Philistines see the Ark, they say this violates the Geneva Convention. This is dirty pool. You can't bring a god into the battle here. And the Philistines say, we remember what that God did to Egypt. This is word. Well, we'll just give it the old University of Philistia try and do the best we can. And they not only win, but they capture the ark. Now this raises the question, was God in the ark or not? Now the Philistines thought was there, and the Israelites thought that God was there, but how can God get captured? Well, the Philistines bring the ark to the first of 5 Philistine cities. And this is a big deal for them, so we're going to have a museum display. We're going to put the ark right beside Dagon, the Philistine god. Sell tickets. Stand in line. So they open the door the first day. The ark's there. Dagon has fallen over. We have to postpone. We have to postpone opening day. So they put Dagon back on so they can stand up. They open up again. Dagon has fallen again. Arms gone, head off. This is a God that can't do anything or think anything. Was God in the box or not? Well, it stays in that city for a little while until the mayor of that city calls the next mayor and said, would you guys like to have the ark? Because we're really miserable, and the ark is brought to each of the 5 cities, and doing all of these awful things, or all these awful things are happening when the ark. Was God in the ark or not? Well, finally, the Philistine theologians get together and they say, look, you guys don't understand. You need to send this thing back. And we need to do it in such a way that we'll know that something is going on. So we want you to get 2 cows who have just had calves. Now, if anyone who knows anything about a mama cow, she's not going to leave her calf. They have never been trained to pull a cart. So you got mama cows, never been trained, and you're just going to strap them up. And they're going to give. They gave them a little some little trinkets to put on there, and the ark goes back, and the ark goes right back to where it was supposed to go, so that the Philistine theologians said, "See, we told you that this is something going on here." Now here's the part where Eli was watching for the ark. He was watching at the battle. How can he watch? He can't see. And very, very interestingly, a runner is coming to tell him news. And in the way this is narrated, it's like the runner runs right by Eli, goes to talk to some other, comes back, runs by him. The Hebrew word is ba, and it's used 5 times in a very, very short time. So we get an idea, well, this guy is afraid to tell Eli what he has to tell him. So, finally gets there. He says, now, sir, we lost. This is before the ark has come back. We lost big. Your 2 sons were killed, and the ark was stolen. And it's when he hears about the ark that he falls down, breaks his neck, and dies. He does not even respond when he's told about his 2 sons. And so in some ways, Eli is a sympathetic figure because he was so zealous for the ark. But all of this stuff about being watching, he's watching for the ark, watching about the battle, and he can't even see. And again, if Samuel was prepared to speak, this whole story happens in the ambience of a prophetic pregnant pause. Now, a pregnant pause is when silence is even more important than saying something. One of the ways I illustrate a pregnant pause, some of you are old enough to remember the famous comedian Jack Benny. And one of Jack Benny's shticks was that he was very, very, very frugal. And they would do this gag where a mugger would say, "Your money or your life." And Benny would say nothing. And he would, remember how he did that? And Benny would finally say, I'm thinking. And of course, until he says something, everyone is roaring uproariously because we know his reputation of being tight-fisted and cheap and that sort of thing. And so with the prophetic pregnant pause, the story is designed to say God had just prepared a prophet for Israel, and they paid 0 attention. And the word of Samuel went forth to all Israel, and they just trot off to battle. No one talks to God. No one says, is this God's will? Should we do this or should we not do this? And they get their hats handed to them. Now, as for was God in the box or not, if you think God is in the box, God isn't. And when you think God isn't in the box, God is. God will not be managed. but God will defy all of our expectations. Okay. So this is a little story of Samuel. It fulfills the fact that Hannah is in some ways responsible for the prophetic ministry in Israel. Her son, that she at first allowed to be an apprentice to a priest, has become a prophet, and Samuel will be a big deal. He doesn't appear in 2 Samuel, but he has 2 books named after him, and that's pretty good. And then, of course, when he's ready to do his stuff, Israel pays no attention, and of course they're on the way. And eventually, we discover that at the end of Judges, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their wrong eyes. The kingship did not bring what it needed to be. The prophets ordained and anointed kings, but what the kings ended up doing was led the people in such a way that both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom went into exile. Okay. Now, there's some further reflections on 1 Samuel 3. Once again, we've had this on every story, God comes to people rather than the other way around. Even though we are dealing with priests and an apprentice to a priest, God is the one who takes the initiative. God comes to people, not the other way around. Once again, there is an aspect of mystery, even confusion in the encounter. The priest doesn't recognize the voice. The guy that's being called does not recognize the voice. You know, we have these views of these biblical heroes and heroines. They would, I had a student once. I had them do observations, and she says, well, God seemed to be a whole lot more roundabout in those days. And she sort of was reflecting that we, we think, wouldn't it be fun to be with Jesus going from Cana in Galilee and something? And we think, well, those guys had all the advantages. They were bumbling idiots most of the time. And we have the advantage, actually, of 2,000 years of history. And in some ways, you could make an argument, a theological argument. We have a much better understanding and relationship to Jesus through the Eucharist, through 2,000 years of history, the combination of all Christian tradition than the disciples did. Now, they might have been buds, but maybe not. I mean, there's places Jesus says, come on, guys, you got to at least stay awake. I mean, it's not pretty. So there's an aspect of mystery, even confusion, even in the encounter stories. It's not just a sort of easy thing. Oh, here's God. This is Eli, for pity's sakes. He's a priest at Shiloh. Takes him 3 times. Oh my goodness, next time it might be God. And Samuel's no better. Which leads me to my third point. God or God's voice was not so familiar that either were immediately recognized. Again, we think of this as we read the stories, we think we are in such a worse position. And that's not the case. Now, what we could start thinking about, let's see, has God ever tried to talk to me? And I ran someplace else and they, was it you? I mean, think of all the places, if you believe, as I do, that God is in all of the nitty and gritty of life, and sometimes can speak to us mostly through other people. That's why we preach. In one sense, anyone who's a preacher knows how absurd that is. Why not just read the text and sit down? I've been a preacher for a very, very long time. I was preaching before I ever should have done it. But the great advantage of being young, you're stupid and it doesn't occur to you. You should wait a little bit. But early on, I realized this is absurd. What do I know? And here's what gave me encouragement. Sometimes I would put a sermon together and I think, this is pretty good. How about those Mariners? And then at other times, I feel like there's cotton in my mouth. I just want to get out of here. And someone comes up and I'm shaking hands and a tear is in their eye. Go figure. Go figure. Because what we say may or may not be used by the Spirit in that person at that time, and you can never predict that. Or at least I can never predict it. Once again, the encounter involves a community, not simply an individual. If you're a prophet, you have to have a people. God calls a prophet so that God can speak to God's people. This is about community. This isn't so that someone can say, wow, last night God called me. Ain't I special? It has nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that. God had in mind something more than individual enhancement. This was to provide the community with something it desperately needed. It wasn't simply for the individual. Now, none of the people involved expected an encounter with God. It's time for bed. Good night, Samuel. Good night, sir. And they go off to their play and they go to bed. No one's expecting God. It seemed to be the last thing that they ever thought of. In fact, even if God's calling, they don't even think. It doesn't even occur to them. Now, this raises the question, did Eli and God sound so much alike? What does God sound like when God talks? The encounter involved something negative, judgment on Eli. The judgment came with the death of his two sons. Now, ironically, Samuel also had two sons, and they disgraced the prophetic office. And it was because of their behavior, when Samuel got old, Israel went to him and said, Samuel, you're getting on. Who knows how long you have? We want you to give us a king just like all the other nations. Bummer, bad move, because Israel never survived the kings. Never survived the kings. The transition from priest to prophet was not a function of human plans. It was God's doing. God broke in. God challenged the categories. God just, busted out, so to speak. There was no committee, there was no white paper, there was no plans. This is how God does it, at least in biblical stories. And, as I mentioned, this incident set the stage for the next story, in which Samuel is poised to speak, but is absent in the next incident. By the way, this also has to do with how cleverly this material has been edited. The source critics would say, I think correctly, that the story of the ark originally did not have Samuel in it. And so you have this story about Samuel's call, and it makes no sense. You have all this build-up for 3 chapters, Samuel, 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 and you got Samuel, and all of a sudden, he's not even in the next story. And it would be a perfect story. You're going to go to battle. This is the time when you need to talk to a prophet. And so all you have to do, some editor says, the word of Samuel went forth to all Israel. That's how I'm going to begin the story of the capture of the ark. I mean, this is called redaction criticism, and these guys did it brilliantly, just brilliantly. And we don't know if it was an individual or a committee. Who knows? It's completely lost to history as to how this, and this happened over long periods of time. But this is what enamored me with biblical stories. It was so cleverly, masterfully, authentically done. There are places where you say, well, this doesn't quite fit. This is even a contradiction. These people were just as smart as I am. They could see contradictions. And they didn't smooth them out. They didn't harmonize them. They let the contradictions stand, and whenever I see a contradiction, oh, I see. They're trying to tell me something. It's so blatant, it's so obvious. Why would they not smooth? You could smooth it out. You could smooth it out. In fact, if you go to a library, you can find a book that is called A Harmony of the Gospels. Wretched things, but they're there. Because when you write a harmony of the Gospels, you are producing a text that no one wrote and no one read. The church says we have 4 canonical Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And that's not the order in which they were written. That's for theological reasons. Don't harmonize. Don't harmonize. There's one gospel in which two thieves on the cross, they both upbraid Jesus. And one in which one comes to Jesus and the other one does. Let the contradiction stand. Don't harmonize. You know, and in one way, it's an outrageously conservative position. I'm taking the text just as it comes. I've been accused my whole life by fundamentalists and evangelicals that I don't take the Bible seriously, and I always say, I think I do. I actually read it and pay attention to what it says. And I can read it, I can see the contradictions, and I say, why is it there? And it's all, pardon?
There was a poster that says, I take the Bible too seriously to take it literally.
Well, literally means different things. I would hear that, and they would say, Dr. Spina, you don't take it literally. I said, that's exactly how I take it. I don't always take it historically. That's a different thing. But I take it literally. Literally means you pay attention to the text. That's all. And what you conclude about that, and the Bible is such a reservoir. There's no such thing as one interpretation. There is a interpretation, that sort of thing. Okay, responses, questions.
Just a quick question. Where Samuel was sleeping by the ark, I thought the ark was in a special place in the temple.
Well, the temple's not been built yet.
Oh, that's why.
Yeah.
But there was when they were in the desert, in the wilderness, there
Well,
was all
you put
these.
the ark in the tabernacle, the wilderness tabernacle. But sometimes the ark is in different places depending on the story.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We still can't get over Indiana Jones and that whole thing.
So I hate to come this close to the Song of Hannah and not say something about it. So
Say something.
No, I don't want. I want you to say something about it, and maybe even the Magnificat as it kind of.
Well, in her prayer, in Hannah's prayer, she celebrates reversals. The poor will become rich. The hungry will be full. Those who are full will become hungry. The weak will become strong. And you can hear all of the cadences. Jesus said, the first will be last. All of that stuff. Because when God is involved, normal, ordinary, intuitive realities are turned on their heads. And that's what Hannah prays. And she even says, when she mentions the anointed one, the Messiah, in Hebrew, Messiah is translated into Greek as Christ. You know, when we say that Jesus Christ is not Jesus' last name. There was no mailbox with JC in Nazareth. And she says that it's not by power that God will deal with the Messiah, the anointed one. And sure enough, you see, when they asked for a king, they said, we want one like all the other nations. Well, in Deuteronomy, they've already told you what you could have. You can have a king. But there are 3 conditions. You can't multiply horses, you can't multiply women, and you can't multiply money. Now, who does that sound like? That sounds like Solomon, or Solomon, yeah, of course. And of course, because it's not, horses simply means the military. Money means money. And the women, Solomon had all of these women. This was national diplomacy, because you would have relationships with all these other kings by marrying their daughters, and they're going to send your daughter to them. That helps relationships, but those are not kinds of relationships that God wanted for Israel. So now, this is all after the fact. I mean, this is all written after they go through this, but it's, and of course, in the Magnificat, Mary is weak but strong. She's lowly but exalted, and all of those reversals are there. Yeah.
So could we say that Hannah is a prophetess?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Can we say Mary is a prophetess?
Well, I think in some ways you could argue in the nativity story, Mary is a kind of a prophetess in that the moves that she makes are the things that makes Jesus' ministry, and even the thing when she goes to her cousin and John the Baptist is in her womb and that sort of thing. So I think, yeah, that you could argue that she was a prophet. Now, I think in Mariolatry, they don't think of her much of as a prophet, but I think that's very legitimate, I think.
Yeah. Just one last comment. I think Solomon gets a real pass.
Oh, he's
I mean,
awful.
He's terrible.
Yes, yeah.
But he's our terrible.
Yeah. Here's one right here.
So you pointed out, it said the word of the Lord hadn't been heard in the land, or was rarely heard in the land. And you've alluded to the way that in our contemporary liturgy we're sort of uniting priestly and prophetic functions. I hear quite frequently people say, "Oh, this is a prophetic statement. This is prophetic language." I hear a lot of language today about how prophetic we are, and I was wondering if you would comment on that.
I'm ambivalent on that. When I hear Martin Luther King Jr., I say that's prophetic. But I'm also aware that we are not prophets and apostles. That happened long ago. And so in a metaphoric way, I think there are people who are prophetic, saying just exactly what needs to be said, even if it's a hard word to listen to, is okay. But when you say a prophet, I worry about someone who thinks that they are prophetic, which means my argument is right and yours isn't because I'm prophet. Because that's calling forth a special information from God that I don't think God supplies. You need to have a good argument, and you don't get to say, well, God gave me this argument. Yeah, so I think there are people who I think are prophetic in that metaphorical sense. But I get nervous when people say that I have a special... I don't know how this happens, but I have an email from somebody. It's about the end of the day times. And this has been around for about 150 years. And bless their hearts, they are never deterred that the dates don't work, or the world does not come to an end when they say. But this person, of course, she is thrilled about the Iran war because, Jesus is going to go, Well, you know what? We've had wars from, you can't name a period in human history that there haven't been wars. We're really good at that. But if it's the Middle East, and it doesn't matter what the global or strategic issues or why we got in it or why the situation or what led to it, none of that matters. What matters is, 3 cherry-picked verses from Ezekiel and that sort of thing. I don't engage this person because I think she would be impervious to argument because she gets it right from God. And I would lose even to engage. So that's the kind of prophecy that I think it's dirty pool to claim. Yeah.
I was once told that that biblical prophecy it changes with the revelation of the Christ. That prophecy is a foretelling of what is to come, and that essentially post the revelation of who Jesus is in the resurrection, this is where the turning point of becoming a witness becomes. So a difference between looking forward and then witnessing is looking and seeing the full revelation, if you will. And I wonder if that is a distinction that somehow kind of gets lost when we are folks in Christian tradition, or at least claim to be, when they're looking to the wars or looking toward something and not seeing the hypocrisy of that in no way Jesus would, if Jesus were in the flesh in our midst right now, would condone such behavior.
My response to this is that the earliest fathers thought of the prophets predicting Christ. Christ fulfilled it. And so my answer to this, that these are prophecies being fulfilled, so no, they were fulfilled 2,000 years ago. Now, I would also answer, though, that the biblical prophets, meaning the Old Testament prophets, are typically not predictive except for in the short term. And that means you can preach it in terms of seeing an analogy in our own setting. And sometimes the predictions are made so that they won't happen. The famous Jonah, Jonah goes to Nineveh, 40 days and you're toast. And then they repent. Even the cows repented. Now, if the cows repented, you did a good sermon that day. And Jonah is teed off. He says, I knew you'd be gracious to these people. That's why I didn't want to come in the first place. The king of Nineveh just said, let's repent. Who knows, this God might change his mind, and God does. So there's a prediction that you hope doesn't happen. And also, even the Christological predictions, they all have perfectly good meanings in their earliest setting. In the famous prophecy of Jesus' so-called virgin birth, it wouldn't really be comforting to go tell the king the Syrians are at the door. In 600 years, no problem. That's no great comfort, And the whole point of it was a young woman in Hebrew, Parthenos in Greek, and they read Greek, she's going to have a baby. And before that child has grown up and knows the difference in right and wrong, how old is that? 8, 6, 10? Syria will no longer be a problem. So it's a short-term prediction. And you'll know it. You'll be able to call the prophet and say whether or not you were right or wrong. But then later on, it was given a different Christological reading, sort of thing. So biblical prophecy is a complicated matter. It's just not a simple thing. But I think you're quite right in terms of the Christian stuff. The New Testament says this has all been fulfilled. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. What else? Anyone else? Going once? Going, yes, good.
Youth student question that came up a couple years ago. I found it interesting because I hadn't ever thought about this, but one of my youth students a couple years ago was so angry that, I don't know, I guess our modern feminist readings, that Hannah had to have a kid to feel justified. She was so mad about this. I had a particular answer to that, but I was just curious, if you've come across that ever.
Oh, yes, of course.
How did you approach that if you answered it? Because it's happened to me a couple of times. Well,
in the biblical world, having a child was a big deal. Historically, and I just found this out from YouTube, infant death has been enormous in the human with Homo sapiens. And so it takes a while, and that's basically a first world problem, right? I don't think she had to quote unquote have a child to feel justified. And she does wonderful things apart from Samuel. She's a prophetic figure, but she wanted a child. Is it against feminism to say that I want a child? I don't think so. I know feminists. Some of my best friends are feminists. And they have children and love their children and are wonderful with their children.
What's the cultural situation there?
Well, it's of course patriarchal, and that is shown in Elkanah's dumb remark. Well, am I not more to you than 10 sons? And the answer is no, you idiot. Yeah, and let me just say one more thing, and then we'll be done. Even though the Bible is so patriarchal, the text and these rascals who edit it often subvert it. They make the men look like incompetents, like in Exodus. The women are all heroic. Shiphrah and Puah, and Moses' mother, and Moses' sister, and Zipporah, and the Pharaoh's daughter. And Moses is this blumbling guy that doesn't even think about anything. And the Pharaoh's an idiot. Now that can't be an accident. They understand that. Yeah. You're a good group. All right, next we'll do one New Testament story next week. We'll do Paul, or actually Saul, on the Damascus Road. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Any from the back in television land? No questions? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, here.